In this video, I'll be showing you how to make this ribbed button-up vest. I am making a size small, but you can adjust this to your size and I'll show you how to do that in the video. For this project, I used 220 grams of medium weight yarn, a 6mm hook, a darning needle, some stitch markers, a pair of scissors, and some buttons. I used the Hemline size 40 25mm wooden buttons. For my yarn, I'm using 4 Seasons Spot Saver USA style, and this yarn is medium weight, which I believe is the same as 10 ply or Aran. I'm not actually using this colour for my project, but I didn't have any nice balls left of the colour that I was actually using. So to start this project, you're going to need to make a slip knot in your yarn and insert your 6mm hook. Now we're going to make a chain of 26. If you are making a size other than small, you just need this chain to reach from under your armpit to the bottom of where you would like your vest to finish. Okay, so now you should have your chain of 26. You're going to block off that last chain, chain up 2 more times, 1, 2, and we're going to do a half double crochet into that chain that we've blocked off. So in the 3rd chain from the hook, you're going to yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. So we'll do that again, yarn over, insert into the next chain, pull through, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through, 3. So you just need to go ahead now and continue doing half double crochets into every stitch, going all the way down until you get to the end. Okay, so now you should have made it down to the other end doing your half double crochets. So I'll just do my last one. And then you're going to chain up 1, turn your work, and now we're going to do back loop slip stitches going all the way down. So we've got the 2 sides of the stitch here. This is the front closest to your body and the back is this one here. So you're going to insert into that back loop only, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through again. So we'll do that again. Insert into the back loop only, yarn over, pull through, and pull through again. So now you're just going to continue doing back loop slip stitches all the way down until you get to the other end. This is going to be the repeating pattern now, doing back loop half double crochets and back loop slip stitches, but I will show you how to do the next row because we're going to increase. Okay, so now I've reached the other end again. I'm going to do my last slip stitch, and now we're going to chain up 2 and turn our work, and we're back to doing half double crochets. So just like the last row, we're going to go into that back loop only and do a half double crochet into that back loop only. So just continue doing this until you get to the other end, and we're actually going to do an increase into the last stitch of this row. So join back in for that. Okay, so now you should have reached the end of your 3rd row, and I'm just going to do a normal half double crochet into the 2nd last stitch, and into the last stitch we're going to do 2 half double crochets. So just do 1 as normal, and then we're going to go straight back into that same stitch and do a 2nd one. So now we've just increased this row by 1 stitch. So this is going to be the repeating pattern now for the next 4 rows. So we have 2 rows with no increases, and now we're going to have 5 rows with an increase on the half double crochet row only. So you won't be increasing on the slip stitch row. So we can just chain up 1, turn our work, and then just do slip stitches as normal. When you get to the end, just turn around and come back up to the top as normal, and then you're going to need to put 2 half double crochets into that end stitch again, like we just did. So you're going to have 5 rows in this section in total, or once you finish this row, it's only 3 more, and then you can join back in. Okay, so now I've come to the end of my 7th row, or my 5th row with the increase in the increase section, but 7 in total. So I'm just going to do my last 2 half double crochets, doing both of them into the same stitch as my increase. And now we're going to start working on the shoulder chunk. So for this, I'm going to need to chain up 27 stitches. If you are making a different size, just make the chain long enough to go from the top of your shoulder to under your armpit. So now you've done your 27 stitches, we're going to block off that last stitch and chain up one more time. And now, because we've just done our half double crochet row, we're up to a slip stitch row. So we're going to do 1 slip stitch into each of these chains. So skipping that first one into the second stitch from the hook, I'm going to do a slip stitch. And now I'm going to continue going all the way back down this row, doing slip stitches. An important thing to note here is that you want to make sure that this is perfectly flat and it's not at all twisted when you're doing these last few stitches when it's going into the body, because you don't want it to be all twisted around and wonky. So just make sure that it's flat when you do that. Now keep going down to the end and then we will continue on. Okay, so now you should have reached the end of row 8, so I'm just doing my last slip stitch. And then you're going to chain up 2, turn your work, and now we're back to the back loop half double crochets. You're just going to go all the way up this row as normal, and you're not going to do any increases or decreases. We're just doing it like we did for this first one here. So you're going to do that, and you're going to do 3 rows in total. So you should be up to row 11 by the time you finish this section. So you're going to do a half double crochet, a back loop slip stitch, a back loop half double crochet, and then we should be up the top and meet back there to start on the neck portion. Okay, so now you should have made it to the end of your 11th row, or the 4th row in this shoulder chunk. I'm just going to do my last half double crochet. Now up until this point, one of the front panels and the back panel is exactly the same. So if you're doing one of the front panels, the right side front panel or the back panel, you'll do exactly what you've done all the way up until here, and this is where we diverge. So if you're doing the back panel, you're going to continue doing these stitches, the back loop slip stitch and the back loop half double crochet with no increases or decreases, and you're going to do 33 rows and then join back in, and I will go over how to do the underarm portion on the other side. If you're doing the front panel, we're going to start decreasing to give ourselves a neckline. So for the front panel, we're going to chain up 1 and we're going to start decreasing. So now for both the back loop slip stitch rows and the back loop half double crochet rows, we're going to do 2 decreases. So to start off, we're going to insert our hook into that first stitch, yarn over, pull through, and then straight into that second stitch, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through both loops on the hook. That is your stitch 2 together for the back loop slip stitch. So now we're going to do that again. Insert yarn over, pull through, insert yarn over, pull through 2. So now we've done 2 decreases going down. We're going to continue going all the way down to the end of the row as normal, just doing our normal back loop slip stitches, and then turn around and come back up to the top, and I will show you the next part. Now you should have made it back up to the top of your 13th row, and we're going to do our decreases for the back loop half double crochet. So you need to leave the last 4 stitches free, and we're going to do 2 lots of 2 together stitches. So to do this, you need to yarn over, insert your hook into the back loop only, yarn over, pull through, and then straight into that next stitch we go, insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through all 4 loops on the hook. So we're going to do that again, yarn over, insert into the back loop, yarn over, pull through, straight into the next back loop, yarn over, pull through, and yarn over, pull through all 4 loops on the hook. Now we're going to chain up 1, turn our work, and we're back to doing our 2 lots of decreases for the slip stitch rows. So I'll show you this one more time. So we'll insert into that first stitch, into the second stitch, and pull through, and one more time. So now you can see the pattern is to do, on every row you're going to do 2 decreases. So now you can continue going ahead doing 2 decreases on the top of every row until you make your neck sort of half, it's going to be half of a V, and you want it to come down to the middle of your sternum, which will be 12 rows if you are following this pattern for a small. If you are doing any other size, just measure it against the top that you already have, or try to measure it against yourself. Then we will move on to doing the back panel and the front left panel. Once you have finished your 12 rows, this is what your front panel should look like. And the entire thing so far is 22 rows if you're counting it from that first row, not including the foundation chain. Now we're going to get started on the back panel. To do this, you're going to need to go back to the start and redo that first underarm push-in up until we get to the shoulder chunk, and then continue on from there like I described earlier in the video. So once you have finished doing your 33 rows across the top, so we're counting 33 from this first back loop slip stitch row, so you count 33, and I've finished on a slip stitch row and I've ended up at the bottom. So if you're following this pattern, you should be at the bottom as well. And now that we've done those 33 stitches, or if you want to count from the start, it's 40 stitches, not including the foundation chain. We're now going to do this section on the other side. So we're basically just going to reverse it. So to do that, if you'll remember, we did 27 chains going up here, plus 1 to turn, but we don't need to worry about that one right now. So now what you're going to do is count 27 stitches from the top and put in a stitch marker. If you don't have a stitch marker, you could use a bobby pin, or you could use a spare hook that you have in a different size and just slot it through that 27th stitch. So that's what I'm going to do first. So 27, so I'm inserting my stitch marker into that 27th stitch. And now, just to make sure that it's right, you can fold your top in half, line up the bottoms, and just make sure that the stitch marker is equal with the stitches on this side, and it is. So now what we're going to do is do our back loop half double crochets as normal, coming from the bottom all the way up to the top, but we're going to do a decrease into this stitch because we did an increase on this row, so now we're going to start decreasing. So go ahead and do your back loop slip stitches until you get almost up to this stitch marker, and then join back in and I will show you what to do. Okay, so now you should have made it up to your stitch marker, and we are actually not going to be stitching into the stitch that has a stitch marker because we did 27 chains when we did the other side and we counted 27 down. So the last stitch will actually be this one here, which would be 28. So now into those last 2 stitches, we're going to do a decrease. So it's just like we've done before, yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull through, straight into that next stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 4 loops on the hook. We're only doing 1 decrease in the half double crochet rows, and we're doing no decreases in the slip stitch rows, if you remember from the start. So at the start we did 5 rows in this section, so we're going to do that again, and you want 3 of the rows to be your half double crochet rows. So this is the first row, and then we're going to do a slip stitch row, another half double crochet row with a decrease, another slip stitch row, and another half double crochet row with a decrease. So there should be 3 rows in total with decreases because we're not doing decreases in the slip stitch row. So for the next row, you just chain up 1, turn your work, and then as normal, do back loop slip stitches going down. So now just continue doing this. So you're going to do 5 rows in total. This is the second row, so after this row, there's 3 more. And then join back in for the tiny last little bit that goes under the armpit. Okay, So you should have finished your 5 rows in this decrease underarm portion section. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've just done my 5th, which has a decrease in it. And now we're in the home stretch. We just have 2 rows to go. So the next row will be a slip stitch row with no decreases, and the final row will be a half double crochet row with no decreases. So I'm going to chain up 1 and do my next row as normal, and then turn around and do my back loop half double crochets, coming all the way back up to the top with no decrease, and you can join me up there. Okay, so now I'm just doing my last 2 stitches, and we're not doing any decreases into these ones. So now we'll chain up 1 and you can cut and tie. It'd probably be a good idea to leave a longish tail so that you can stitch the 2 sides together, but you definitely don't have to do that. So now we can remove the stitch marker, and that's the back panel finished. So you should have a total of 47 rows going from one side to the other, not counting the foundation chain. Okay, so now we are moving on to doing the front left panel, and it's going to be almost exactly the same as the front right panel, but we need to do the rows in reverse. So we need to do the slip stitch row first and the half double crochet row second, to make sure that the lines on the front side of the vest are shown. If you do it exactly the same as you did the right side, you would have to have this panel inside out, and we don't want that. So we're going to adjust slightly, but all of the stitch numbers should be exactly the same, keeping in mind that the turning chains for the slip stitch row and the half double crochet row are different. So to start, we're going to create a slip knot like we did last time, and we're going to chain 26, or whatever you chained for the other panels if you're doing a different size. Okay, so once you've chained 26, we're going to block off that last chain and we're going to do 1 more chain. For the front right panel, we did 2 chains because our first row was half double crochet, but we only want to do 1 chain this time because we're going to go into our slip stitches. So now we're just going to go all the way back down this row doing our slip stitches as we've done before. So once you get to the end, join me back there. And just doing my last slip stitch. Now we're going to chain up 2 and do our row of back loop half double crochets like we did last time. Once you get to the end, this is our second row, and we will be doing our third row. And in the front right panel on the third row was where we did our first lot of increases. But as you'll be able to tell, this time our third row is actually going to be slip stitches. And we didn't do any increases on the slip stitch row for the armpit portion. So we're going to have to delay our increases to the 4th row. So go ahead and finish this row, then do your next slip stitch row, and then join me back. Now you should be at the end of your 3rd row. I'm just doing my last slip stitch. So for our front right panel, we actually did our first increase here, which was the end of our 3rd row, but now we're going to do our increase at the start of our 4th row, so it's not going to look uneven once you've sewn it all together, so don't worry about that. So now we're going to do our half double crochet, so I'm going to chain up 2, turn my work, and now I'm going to do 2 half double crochets into this first back loop here. So we'll just do what we did before, doing a regular half double crochet into the back loop, and now we're going to add 1 more into that same back loop, and now we're going to continue going all the way down as normal. So that's our first increase. This is where it's going to get a little bit confusing because it's going to face this way, isn't it? Because we did 3 rows of half double crochets with increases in them, but for this section, because we did 5 rows here, there were 2 slip stitches and 3 half double crochets, but if we can keep continuing with this pattern, we'll have 3 slip stitch rows and 2 half double crochets. So we're going to have to add an extra half double crochet. So this is our 4th row, so you're going to need to do 4 more rows to make sure that you have 3 half double crochet rows with increases in them in total. So it's going to add a row to what we're up to. So instead of doing the 7 rows to get up to here, we're actually going to do 8 rows. So now just continue ahead. Once you finish this row, do 4 more rows and make sure that 3 of those are half double crochets with an increase, and then join back in, and I will go over how to do this section. So now I've finished my 8 rows across with 3 of the half double crochet rows having an increase, and I've ended up at the bottom. So what we're going to do is chain up 1, and we're going to do our normal row of back loop slip stitches going all the way up to the top, and then we're going to do our chains for the shoulder chunk. So just continue doing your back loop slip stitches going all the way up, and when you get to the top, join back in. Okay, so now I'm just doing my last back loop slip stitch, and now we are going to chain up 27, or whatever you chained for the other panels if you're doing a different size. Okay, so now I've got my chain up of 27, and I'm going to block off that last stitch and do a chain up of 2. Last time we did a chain of 1 because the next row was slip stitches, but this time we're doing a chain of 2 because the next row is half double crochets. So chain up 2, and then turn your work, and we're going to go into that third stitch from the hook, and we're going to do our half double crochet. So now we're going to continue going all the way back down the line with half double crochets, and you want to remember, the same as we did the first time with the slip stitches, you want to check that this section of your work is not twisted. So when you finish getting down to the bottom, you want to make sure that your work is not twisted when you do your stitches into the back loops of this row. So if you are confused about this, join back at this point, otherwise just keep going on all the way down to the end. Okay, so now we've made it to this middle section, so I'm just going to do my last half double crochet into the chain, and now when I do my first half double crochet into the back loop, I'm going to check that my work is all flat and it's not twisted, and then I'm going to continue on as normal. So now just keep going until you get to the bottom of this row, and then join back in, and I will tell you what to do next. Okay, so once you finish that row, you should have just finished row 10, and I'm just comparing it to the other side to show you a little bit of where the differences are. So basically in this one, we only did one of the half double crochet rows that didn't have an increase or a decrease, and because we've actually done a full row here, that's going to be the equivalent of our no increase or decrease row. And as you know, at the start we added an extra row because we started off on a different stitch, and that's kind of come back in here. So we're actually going to do one less here, so you're going to end up doing the same number of rows in total. So now we're going to go all the way up to the top, doing our back loop slip stitches with no increases or decreases, and when we get to the top we're going to start decreasing. So I will go back up to the top and I will join you up there. So now I've made it all the way up to the top of my back loop slip stitch row, and this is row 11. So I'm just going to do my last 2 slip stitches as normal, and now we're going to start decreasing. So to do that, we're going to chain up 2, turn our work, and just like last time, we're going to do 2 decreases in the first 4 stitches. So to do that, we'll yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through, and then straight into that next stitch, and yarn over, pull through all 4 loops on the hook. So this is exactly the same as what we did for the other front panel, and because we do want them to be the same. And now we're just going to continue doing our normal back loop half double crochets going all the way down. When you get up to the top, we're going to do our 2 decreases again in the slip stitch row, and then continue going with 2 decreases in every row going forward until we get enough rows to get to our sternum. So just continue doing that. If you want to see these slip stitch decreases again, join back in. Otherwise, you can just continue on and mirror the other front panel and how many rows you did for that. Or you can do the same number of rows that I did in the front right panel. Okay, so now I've made it back up to the top of my back loop slip stitch row. So I'm just going to do my last regular slip stitch. And now into the last 4 stitches, I'm going to do 2 decreases, just like we did with the other front panel. So you're just going to insert, yarn over, pull through, straight into that next stitch, yarn over, pull through, then pull through 2 loops on the hook. So we're just going to continue doing the rows with 2 decreases in each row going forward. So now I'm just starting the next row, chain up 2, and I'm going to do my half double crochet decreases again, just like we did for the other panel. So now just continue on doing these rows with 2 decreases in each row, and you should have 11 rows in total in the decrease section. So that's starting from this first half double crochet row where we did our decreases. So from there you need to do 11 rows until you get to the middle of your sternum. If you're doing a different size, that will vary a little bit, but you can just match it to the front panel. You should have already worked out the sizing by now, so this one should be easier. Once you have finished doing your 11 rows with the 2 decreases, you'll have finished your front left panel, and I've ended up at the bottom. So if you're following this pattern, you should end up at the bottom as well. The total number of rows in this section is 22, and that's not including the foundation chain. So that lines up with our front right panel, which also has 22 rows from start to finish without including the foundation chain. This section with the 2 decreases is actually 12 rows for the front right panel and 11 rows for the front left panel, but they equal up to be the same because we did a different number of rows on the side, but it will look the same when it's on your body. Now we should have finished all 3 of our panels. So we've got our back panel and our 2 front panels, and the next step is to stitch them all together. So to do this, you want to make sure that your back panel is face up, so the good side up, which is this side, not this side. And then we're going to put the front panels face down, so the good side will be down. So you can see there, and line up the edges. And the other one. So now all you're going to need to do is stitch along each of the edges, and also stitch along the top of the shoulder chunk, which will just be a little bit of stitching. So I am going to use a darning needle for this portion, and I will show you a couple of stitches in case you don't know how to do it, so you get an idea, but basically you can go ahead and stitch it together now. So if you have stuck around for this part, you'll just insert your yarn into your needle and grab the 2 sides that you're stitching together. So you just want to make sure that you line up all of the stitches so that each stitch is next to its corresponding stitch in the other portion. And you're just going to insert the needle into one half, then insert the needle into the other half and pull through. And then you're just going to keep doing that. So I'm inserting into the front panel, inserting into the back panel, and pull through. So you can just continue doing this all the way down and then do the other side and the shoulder chunks, and we'll meet back to do the trim. Okay, so now you should have finished stitching your sides together. So I've got the sides stitched here, and then I've also stitched together my shoulder chunk. This is just a small little section because we only did 2 or 3 rows across the top. So now what we're going to need to do is start on our trim that's going to go around the neckline. So it's going to start down on one panel, go all the way around and back down to the end of the other panel. So for this, you need to make sure that you're starting with your front right panel. If you start with the front left panel, when you get up to this part of the neckline and the back, it's going to mean that the stitches are on the wrong side. So you need to start with the front right panel to make sure that this section is going to look nice. So what I'm going to do is turn my work. So I've got the front right panel here, and I need to join on. If this was the last panel that you did and you have your ball still connected, you can just keep going from that. You won't need to join on. But if you do need to join on, what you're going to do is make a slip knot, insert your hook, and then into that first stitch, I'm going to insert my hook, then yarn over and pull through. And then I'm going to chain up one. So now we're going to do a slip stitch into the back loop of every stitch, and you need to do a back loop straight into that stitch that you did join onto. So into that first stitch, we're going to do a back loop slip stitch, and then we're going to continue going all the way around doing our back loop slip stitches. So for this section here at the front, it's going to be relatively easy because you're doing a slip stitch into a stitch that already exists. When you get to the decreased portion of the neckline, it's going to become a bit more challenging because there are no stitches here, there's just rows, and you'll have to find where to insert your hook into these rows, and same with the back. So just continue doing back loop slip stitches all the way up until you get to the start of that V-neck portion, and I'll show you how to go into that section. Okay, so now I'm just doing my last slip stitch into this section that has the regular stitches, the easier section. So now we're moving into the front panel neckline, the V that we did for the front panel. So for this part, it's important that you don't pull your slip stitches too tight, otherwise you'll make the frontal bunchy. So what we're going to do is into each slip stitch row, we're going to put one slip stitch, and into each half double crochet row, we're going to put 2 slip stitches. So by the time we get to this next slip stitch row here, we should have done 3 slip stitches. So I'm going to insert into that first hole that I find 1, and now 2 and 3. So now you can see I'm up to this next row of slip stitches. The first one was here. So now I'm up to that next row and I've done 3 slip stitches. So now we need to do 3 slip stitches before we get to this next front row. So I'm going to find a spot to insert. 1, 2, and 3. So I've done 3 before I got to this next row of slip stitches. Make sure you don't pull this bit too tight when you're doing it. It shouldn't really restrict the top. So keep going, doing 3 into every 2 rows, going all the way up to the top, and then join back, and I will show you how to do it across the back, because you'd think that you'd do the same thing, but it's actually going to be a bit different. All right. So now I'm up to the corner. It's a bit hard to see here, but this is where we joined the 2 sides together. So now I'm going to go from one side, I'm going to jump over to the other side, and I want to pull it a little bit tight. I don't want it to sort of gape open here, so I'm not going to go into this one. I'm going to skip over and go over here. I'm not trying to pull it super tight, but I just don't want it to have a big gap between the sides. So now we're onto the back panel, and instead of doing 1 slip stitch into every slip stitch row and 2 slip stitches into every half double crochet row, we're just going to do 1 slip stitch into every row. So you do 1 slip stitch for this row, 1 slip stitch for this row, 1 for this row, and so on. So it's actually going to pull it a little bit tighter, and I don't know why the top of the back sort of tends to stretch more. I guess that's the reason why this doesn't stretch as much. This stretches a lot. So we're trying to pull it a little bit tighter here. So what I'm going to do is, this is my first slip stitch row here because I've just done this stitch into the half double crochet row. So into the slip stitch row, and now into the half double crochet row, into the slip stitch row and the half double crochet row. So just continue on the back doing one slip stitch into the top of every row, and when you get to the other corner, just remember to jump across and don't let it be too loose in that join, and go down the other side doing 3 slip stitches for every 2 rows, and I'll meet you at the bottom of the other front panel. Okay, so now you should have made it to the end of that other front panel, and we're just going to chain up 1, turn our work, and now we're going to go all the way back doing back loop slip stitches into every stitch. And this row is going to be a lot easier because, as you can see, we have a nice row to base off of, going around the neck and around the back. So just put 1 slip stitch into every stitch that we did in that first row, except we're going to do a decrease in the shoulder. So go ahead and do your slip stitches up until you get to that first shoulder and join back, and I will show you the decrease. So now I'm almost at the corner, and you can see here there are 3 stitches going around the corner. So you've got 1, 2 and 3, and I'm basically going to do a decrease into all 3 of those stitches together. So I'm just going to do my last regular slip stitch here, and now I'm going to do a decrease into the next 3 slip stitches. So insert, yarn over, pull through, then straight into that next stitch, insert, yarn over, pull through, and then straight into that 3rd stitch. Insert, yarn over, pull through, and now we're going to pull through all 3 loops on our hook. Okay, so now you're just going to go around the back portion, doing 1 slip stitch into every stitch, just like we did previously. And if you'd like to see the decrease again, I will show you with the other shoulder. Otherwise, you can continue on going down all the way down to the end of the other front panel. I am up to the other corner, and you can see these 3 stitches here are going around that corner. So you've got 1, 2 and 3. So I'm going to do my decrease into those 3 stitches. So we just need to insert into that first stitch, yarn over, pull through, insert straight into that 2nd stitch, yarn over, pull through, and insert straight into that 3rd stitch, yarn over, pull through, and pull through all 3 loops on the hook. Okay, so now you can just continue on all the way until you get to the end of this row, and then we are going to mark for our buttonholes. So join me back at the end of this row. Okay, so now you should have made it to the end of that 2nd row of the neck portion, and now we need to decide where we want to put our buttonholes. So I want my buttonholes to be on the right side. So this is the right side here when it's actually on your body, and this is the left. So I want my right side to be on top of my left side, so I'm going to put the buttonholes in my right side. If you want your buttonholes in the left side, that's totally fine. You can mark off your gaps for your buttonholes exactly the same as what I'm going to do. We're just going to count from the bottom, so you count from the bottom on either side, but if you're doing them on the left, you'll have to do your slip stitches all the way around before you get to your first buttonhole, whereas because my buttonholes are going to be on the right, we're going to come to them straight away and then do the rest of our slip stitches going all the way around. So because I want my buttonholes on the right, I'm going to grab my right side, and I'm going to grab 2 stitch markers. I'm doing 2 buttonholes, but you can absolutely do 3. You could do as many as you want. You could do smaller buttonholes and have lots of little buttons, but I'm just going to put 2 buttons because I want it to have a deepish V. So I'm going to count 5 stitches from the bottom, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is the 5th stitch from the bottom. And I'm going to insert my stitch marker into the 5th stitch and out through the 6th stitch. So I'm going to bend my stitch marker around. If your stitch markers can't go through 2 stitches, just put it through the 5th one, but remember that you'll have to skip the 6th as well, because our buttonhole is going to be 2 stitches wide. So now I'm going to count for my second buttonhole, and this time I'm going to count 10 stitches. So I'm not going to include the stitches that I used for my buttonhole. I'm going to count this next stitch here as 1. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So here is my 10th stitch. I'm going to insert my stitch marker and out through the 11th. Okay, so now that I've got my stitch markers placed, I'm going to grab my hook, and I need to chain 1 from that previous row. So now we are on to row 3 of our slip stitches for the neckline. So I'm going to back loop slip stitch into the first 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you're doing your buttonholes on the left side, this will be your last 4 stitches here. So now we've got our stitch marker in the 5th and 6th stitch. So I'm going to skip those 2 stitches and do 2 chains instead. So we're going to chain up 1 and 2. And now I'm going to slip stitch into the stitch after, so the 7th stitch. So now I'm going to insert my hook and just do a regular slip stitch. And now I'm just going to continue doing slip stitches until I get to my next stitch marker. Okay, and I'm doing my last stitch. So now I've got my stitch marker in these 2 stitches. So we're going to chain up 2, 1, 2, and now I'm going to back loop slip stitch into this 3rd stitch away from where I just last stitched. So insert, yarn over, pull through. So now I'm going to continue going all the way around until I get to the other side, and then we're going to come back again. So there's going to be 5 rows in total for this slip stitch neckline portion. We're currently doing the 3rd stitch. So for every other row apart from the first row, so we So now we've made it back up to the shoulder portion. As you can see here, we stitched 3 together, and that's that one there. Now we're going to do a decrease of 2 into these 2 stitches here. So insert, yarn over, pull through into that next stitch, insert, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, so now you can just continue on and do the same thing on the other side of the shoulder. So where there was the decrease of 3, we're just going to do a decrease of 2, and then continue going all the way down to the other side, and we will start our 4th row. Now I'm just doing my last stitch in my 3rd row of this neck trim portion. Chain up 1, turn your work, and so now we're just going to go all the way back around doing back loop slip stitches until we get to where our stitch markers are for the buttonholes. So if you did your buttonholes in this side, you will have just finished making those holes. So you will be doing what I'm doing when I get around here, but I have to come all the way around. And so to do that, you're just going to do 1 slip stitch into every stitch, but we are going to do a decrease in the shoulder again. So you probably get the idea by now, but just have a look at where the shoulder is. So you can see that's the line there, and you're going to do a decrease into these 2 stitches here. So just try to find the stitch on either side. If you want the neckline to be a bit tighter, you can also do a decrease of 3 again. So these 3 stitches that go around the corner. So it's up to you how tight you want the neckline to be. You can either do 2 together or 3 together. It won't make a huge difference, but it will make a bit more of an angle if you do 3 together. So just go ahead and go all the way around, making sure that you do at least 2 stitches together as a decrease in each corner. And then join me back when you get to your first stitch marker or your first hole. If you don't have stitch markers, you can just check where the hole is. Okay, so I've made it around to my stitch marker and my buttonhole. So I'm going to do my last back loop slip stitch before the chains. And now, even though the chains don't technically have a back loop, you can see that they still have that V. So we're going to only go into the loop that looks like a back loop there. So this one, I'm going to insert, yarn over, pull through again. So we're just doing a slip stitch, and we're going to go into that next one, insert, yarn over, pull through again. So now just continue doing your back loop slip stitches until you get to your next buttonhole. Okay, so now we're at the next buttonhole. So you can see there with the V, we're going into that back loop of the V and doing our slip stitch. And one more. And now we're just going to finish off the row with our back loop slip stitches. And last one, chain up one, and we're going to turn our work. And so now you can see we've got a buttonhole. Now there's only one more row to go in this front trim neckline section. So just continue on doing one back loop slip stitch into every stitch like we've done, and continue all the way around until you get to the bottom on the other side, making sure to do your decrease at the shoulder. So in the last one, I stitched 2 together, and I'm going to stitch 2 together again because I don't want the neckline to be pulled too tight. But if you want it a bit tighter, just go ahead and stitch 3 together. So go all the way around until you get to the other end, and that will be the end of our front trim, and I will join you there and we will get started on our underarm pit trim. Okay, so now I've made it to the end of the 5th row. I'm just going to chain up 1, and you can cut and tie your work. And so now you should have a full neckline, if I can, with 2 buttonholes, or 3 if you want to do more, or as many as you like really. So we've got our neckline there done. So now it's time to move on to the trim for the armholes. So to make the trim that's going to go around the armhole, you're going to need to grab a piece of yarn and do a slip knot and pull it tight. Okay, so now what we're going to do is chain up 2. So 1, 2, and this chain that's closest to the hook is the turning chain, so we're not going to stitch into that. We're going to skip that first stitch, and we're going to go into the second stitch from the hook, which is this one, and do a slip stitch. So insert, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through that last stitch on the hook. Now we're going to chain up 1, turn our work, and you're going to do 2 slip stitches into this one stitch that we have there. So this first one is the turning chain, so into that second stitch we're going to insert, yarn over, pull through again, and then into that exact same stitch that we just went into, we're going to insert again, yarn over, pull through, and pull through the stitch on the hook. Now we're going to chain up 1 and turn our work, and you can see that we have 2 stitches to work with this time. So into that first stitch I'm going to do another 2 stitches. So not including the turning chain, into that first proper stitch, insert your hook and do a slip stitch, and now we're going to do another slip stitch into that same hole. So insert back into the same spot, yarn over, pull through again, and then we're going to do 1 regular slip stitch into the next stitch. So into that last stitch in the row, insert yarn over, pull through and pull through. So now you should have 3 stitches. It's quite fiddly, this part, because it's so few stitches to work with, but it will get easier in a second. You only have to do this twice. So we've got 3 stitches going across now. So we're going to yarn over, turn our work, and into that both of those first 2 stitches, we're just going to do a regular slip stitch. So don't include the churning chain into that first proper stitch. We're going to do a slip stitch. Into the second stitch, we're going to do another slip stitch, and into that third stitch, we're going to do 2 slip stitches. So into that third stitch there, insert yarn over, pull through again, and again. So now we've got 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to chain up 1, turn our work, and now we're going to increase this to 5 stitches. So into that first stitch from the hook, ignoring the turning chain, that first stitch there, we're going to do 2 slip stitches. So 1, and then straight back into that same hole, another 1, and now we're going to do 3 slip stitches into the next 3 stitches. So 1, 2, and 3. So now we should have 5 slip stitches coming up along here. It's a bit bunchy right now, but it will spread out after the next row. So now we chain up 1, turn our work, and we're just going to put 1 slip stitch into every stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now we chain up 1 and we turn our work. So now we've got 5 stitches that are much easier to see, and that's going to be the repeating pattern for the remainder of the arm trim. So now every row until you get to the end is going to be 5 slip stitches along, so 1 slip stitch into every stitch, and you're going to need to do 63 rows of this in total. So I've already done 3 rows that have 5 slip stitches in them. So I've done 3, I need to do 63 in total, so that means from this point I'm going to do 60 more rows of 5 slip stitches, and then I'm going to join back in and show you how to finish the arm trim off. If you're making a size other than small, you will need to change this measurement, but if you just measure it around your arm with a little bit of stretch, that should be about right. Okay, so you should have just finished doing your 63 rows of the 5 slip stitches. So we're counting from when we started doing 5 stitches, you should now have 63 rows. So we're going to do the V on the other side. So it's basically going to mirror what's on this side. So we're going to slope it down this way. So to do that, I'm going to need to chain up 1, turn my work, and now we're going to do a slip stitch into the first 3 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, and now into the remaining 2 stitches I'm going to do a decrease. So we're going to insert, yarn over, pull through, straight into that next stitch, yarn over, pull through 2. So now I'm going to chain up 1 and I'm going to go straight into another decrease. So I'm going to stitch the first 2 stitches together, and now I'm going to do 2 normal slip stitches. And now we're going to chain up 1, turn around, and now I'm going to do 1 normal slip stitch and then stitch the next 2 stitches together. So I've got 1 and 2 stitched together. Now I'm going to chain up 1 and I'm going to stitch the remaining 2 stitches together. So insert yarn over, pull through, insert yarn over, pull through 2, and now I'm going to chain up 1 and do a slip stitch into that last remaining stitch. And then you can pull your yarn through and cut it off. Now we are going to stitch on the arm trim. So you can see here I've already put the trim on this side, and now I'm going to add the trim to this side. So to join on your arm trim, you can either leave a tail at the end of your arm trim, or you can attach a new piece on, and you can do that by either tying a knot or doing a slip stitch, whichever you prefer. So in order to put this onto the arm, what we're going to do is we're going to be stitching down these sides to the base, so that once they're stitched into the corner, we can then stitch our V's together so that it will sit flat under your armpit. So basically that's how it's going to look when it's under your armpit. So that means that to the vest, you need to be stitching the long sides, not the short sides. So what I'm going to do is, you want it to be facing good side out, and just grab a stitch marker or a bobby pin, or really anything you have that can just hold it in place. It doesn't need to be super secure. So I'm just going to, this is the other end, the end that I don't have my tail attached to. I'm going to slip stitch it, find this middle point on the vest, and put a stitch marker in there to hold it in place. So now I'm going to stretch it up and put the other side down the bottom and stretch my armhole so that it reaches the top. So you're basically folding it in half, bringing it up to the shoulder, and then I'm going to attach it to the shoulder with a stitch marker as well. This is basically to make sure that when you're stitching it, it's stretched out and it's not going to be, you know, short on one side and stretched on the other. You want it to be stretched out evenly. So, and it will be stretched. It won't be all in like this. It'll be out a bit. And then you're going to take your other stitch marker. You can put as many as you want around. I'm just going to add one more for now, and then as I come to this stitch marker, I will move it to the back rather than getting out more stitch markers. So now I'm just measuring, stretching it out, and I'm going to put a stitch marker about halfway down. It doesn't need to be exact, so don't worry about that. You just want it to be somewhat even. So now I'm going to take my tail and thread it through my darning needle. So this part's pretty easy. You've probably done this before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the trim over onto the good side. So we're going to be stitching along here so that when we're finished, we flip it back and the seam is hidden. So fold it out that way, stretch it down to the underarm portion where the seam is, and then just start stitching like you would hand tack anything else. So you just want to make sure that you are inserting the needle through both sides, so through the trim and through the shirt. I've made that mistake before where I was holding it like this and I thought that it was going through both and it was just going through one. So just make sure that you're going through both, and you're just going to do that all the way up. So I'm going to continue doing this, and when I get to the end, back to the start, I'll show you how to stitch the V's together, and then that's all you need to know for the arm trim. Now I've finished going all the way around with my stitching. So we are going to join our V together. So you can see here is the V. So what I'm going to do is turn it inside out so that the stitching is on the inside and not on the outside. Bring my yarn through. So you can see here, this is what it looks like. So basically we're just going to push it together and we're going to stitch up there. So if you have stitch markers, you can put a stitch marker in, but you don't have to. You can just hold the two sides together. I'm going to add in a stitch marker. And I'm going to pick it up, and holding the two sides together like this, I'm just going to do what we did before and stitch it together. And I'm going to do an extra stitch into that same spot just to secure it. And you can finish this off any way you like, but I like to put my needle through that last loop and then through the gap and pull it tight like that. So there you go, that's your arm hole, and I can remove this now. So now we've just got to add on the buttons. The buttons that I am using are hemline size 40 25mm buttons, and they're wood. If you don't have buttons and you don't want to buy buttons, you could definitely make buttons out of yarn. I've seen it before, and I will link a video of somebody else on YouTube making a button out of yarn. And you could also take buttons off something that you either don't wear very much or it's not seasonal. Like, for example, if you're in summer and you want to wear this in summer, you could take a couple of buttons off a winter coat, and then when winter comes around, you could put them back on. Just depends what your situation is, but you definitely don't need to buy brand new buttons if you don't want to, or you don't have easy access to them. Now you can just go ahead and stitch on your buttons using a needle and thread, or the yarn that you used to make this project. So now the very last thing to do is weave in your ends. So if you have a long tail like this, you can just put that straight on your darning needle and do some stitches. If you have a shorter tail, I'll show you what I like to do. I like to insert the needle first. So try to get it somewhere where the stitches are tight. You don't want to make it too obvious from the front. And I'm going through the back, by the way, so this is the back side. So then I put the tail through my needle, and then I just pull my needle through and give it a stretch, and then cut off the excess. So that's it. Once you've finished tucking in all of your edges, you should have finished your vest. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this tutorial was useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I will get back to you. I hope you have a wonderful day.